on from this meeting between President Zelensky and Trump. And Ashley, I'll just start with you first. We've seen their relationship really change over the course of the last year and a half or so that President Trump has been back in office. Do you see it staying on this sort of good place that it's in now, given the success that Ukraine is having on the battlefield?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think that our President Trump, has respect for Mr. Zelensky now that maybe he didn't when he first came in. And I also think the fact that what we've been dealing with in Iran and what we have seen them be able to do with the drone capability is something that is very respected. And how far the U.S.'s capability on the drone, these small, cheap drones, was really behind what is needed in this new modern warfare. But I also think when the president came in, and also a lot of Republicans just were tired of writing blank checks to Ukraine without other countries and without any return of and oversight of where the money's being spent. And I think that's really changed. And I know one of the things that Zelensky was also asking for today was some potential air cover from the United States in regards to various different aspects of that, which we don't need to go into. But my point of this is there's other countries stepping up that weren't stepping up as much as they are now. And I think the president appreciates that.
Joel, why do you think, I mean, Ashley said there's more respect for Zelensky now in the White House. Why do you think that is? I mean, we all remember that infamous meeting in the Oval Office last year when President Trump and J.D. Vance were pretty contemptuous, really, of Volodymyr Zelensky. Now it's different. Why has that changed?
Yeah, Ben, the data just kept on adding up to convince President Trump that this is the better path to take. And it is quite a stunning turnaround, but it's not an overnight turnaround. If you go back to the early days after that meeting with President Zelensky, President Trump, before and after that, was solicitous in many ways of Vladimir Putin, trying to get him to agree to a peace deal, rolling out the red carpet for him, for example, at their first meeting. And he got nothing in return. And he continues to get nothing in return from Vladimir Putin. And now he may even very well be watching Russia supporting Iran at targeting American troops in the Middle East during our war against Iran. So the data is there, the sort of proof that Vladimir Putin is not an American ally or friend and not someone to be working with. I think that just is what's ultimately most convincing. And now we're seeing the appropriate reaction, which is to support Volodymyr Zelensky more aggressively, to move away from isolationism and move towards the European position. And I think this is heading in the direction that Americans should be proud of.
And actually, that direction is changing for some, so-called MAGA influencers. For example, Laura Loomer, we were just talking about, she seems to have an incredible level of influence with the president. And she's been talking about how she's doing an investigation now that perhaps some people were overly influenced by Russia in terms of trying to sway the president. What do you make of that whole situation?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to comment on some of these social media influencers in regards to what they really know and what they don't know. I mean, do I think at the end of the day there's Russia or Chinese influence on all of our social media, not just in the United States, but around the world? Absolutely. But I think that Laura Loomer's probably realizing the same thing as what Joel was just talking about, is the fact that Vladimir Putin is not a friend of the United States, and Ukraine is fighting their life every day to try to, make sure that Russia doesn't take the rest of their land. And so I don't know if that's the influence, and by the way, yes, she's an influencer, and yes, she talks to the MAGA crew, but does the president decide foreign policy based on her tweets? I just don't think that's accurate.
Who do you think would step into Lindsey Graham's shoes, though, as someone who, he was known as sort of a Trump whisperer on the issue of Ukraine and supporting President Zelensky?
I really think that Tom Cotton, I'm not saying just with Zelensky, but I'm just saying in general in regards to kind of the hawkish aspect of the Republican Party that has the ear of the administration. He comes to mind, obviously Deb Fischer, but I think Cotton's probably a little bit closer to this administration.
Can I just ask you?
This is the problem. There's no Lindsey Graham.
Right. Joel, can I just ask you a bit more, just to zero in a bit on this question I was discussing there with the former ambassador to Ukraine about Patriot missiles. And Mr. Zelensky is saying that he met the team from Lockheed Martin, one of the biggest defence companies in the US. We spoke about our joint capabilities related to Patriots and other systems. I mean, this does seem to be absolutely key to what the Ukrainians need and want from the United States to help defend the Ukrainian people from Russian attacks.
Yeah, I mean, Ben, it was a real breakthrough from a political military perspective to get the president to agree to allow for components of the Patriot missiles to be manufactured in Ukraine. And, you know, if you want to get to the heart of President Trump, it's sign a big deal with an American defense contractor. And I think that the money that Ukraine will need for that will come from the Europeans. So for President Trump, it's a win all around. No American dollars spent, but American technology being purchased. And I think for Ukraine, this has been the big ask from missile defense perspective. And if they do achieve this, if it gets done as it should get done, it's really going to be a game changer for their defense. One cautionary note, though, I have to say, is that the more Vladimir Putin feels cornered and the less capable he is at attacking Ukraine, the more dangerous he also becomes. So we have to keep our eye on that ball. Just with more defense in Ukraine does not mean that Russia is going to pull back and stop its war.
Jill, we heard from President Zelensky that he also wants President Trump to help him with a push for diplomacy. We've heard this concept of an air ceasefire. It's been floated for some time now, but it seems to be that is where the focus is on, even for a temporary period of time. Is that something that the US can help with President Putin?
Well, I really do hope that our negotiators read in the Riot Act. You know, they've never been to Kyiv, by the way, and I think that's an important symbol. It would be if they were to go there. But look, the Ukrainians have been striking deep into Russian territory. The Russians have had hundreds of thousands of casualties, I think over 1.2 million overall in the last 4 years between the two sides. Now Ukraine is hitting into civilian areas around Moscow, into essentially the capital of the country that impacts Vladimir Putin's calculations. It's in his interest to get a ceasefire, and that's going to be the argument that needs to be made. And this means taking the war to him and combining it with smart, aggressive American diplomacy, saying enough is enough, no longer coming to him and begging him for a ceasefire, but saying he needs it for his own survival.
Indeed, there is some reporting that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will be making that first visit to Ukraine sometime soon. So we'll keep an eye out for some more confirmation on that. Do stay with us because we've lots more still to come on the programme for you here around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News.
In the world of business, everything is connected. From global hubs to places less traveled. The big stories to your bottom line. The path can be unpredictable. But with the right insights, you can see where the bend in the road will lead. Business on BBC News. Make the connection.
See the latest headlines as they happen with breaking news alerts in the BBC app. And stay informed with live updates on bbc.com. Follow the story with BBC News.
You're watching The Context USA on BBC News. Well, let's return now to those memorial events in Washington for Lindsey Graham. The funeral service is still ongoing in the National Cathedral here in Washington, not too far from where we are. You can see that's live pictures there of President Trump, J.D. Vance, and beside him there, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, listening to the eulogy that's being made by the priest who's presiding over events there. Of course, after this memorial, then Senator Graham's remains will make the journey to his precious South Carolina, where he will be laid to rest there tomorrow. The day began, though, with tributes being paid on Capitol Hill, where he spent so many decades doing that work that he held so near and dear to himself. Hundreds of US lawmakers gathered in the rotunda there to honour him. His outspoken support for an assertive US foreign policy, as we've been discussing, made him one of the party's last remaining prominent hawks.
Well, he was remembered as a gregarious, funny and persuasive congressman. Let's hear tributes now from a couple of senior former colleagues who were at that ceremony.
So I choose to remember Lindsey Graham as a man who could disagree with you without being disagreeable. I choose to remember Lindsey Graham as a person who could fight with you on one issue, but fight for you on another issue. I remember Lindsey Graham as a man who loved people. And because he loved people, he was willing to reason with them, to respect them, and ultimately to persuade them.
But lest anyone think it was all work and no levity with Lindsey, let me just say that there was no one who took his job more seriously than Lindsey Graham. But also no one was more capable of cracking up a room.
Well, let's remember Lindsey Graham a little bit more now with our panel, Ashley Davis and Joel Rubin. And I love that line that he could disagree with you without being disagreeable. That's quite a tribute.
I think the United States political system needs more of that these days.
Yeah, that's the trouble, I guess, isn't it? Because I mean, he was very sort of strident in his beliefs, but as that quote suggests, you know, it wasn't personal. He could agree with you without falling out with you.
Yeah, you know, Ben, I think, look, the reality is that government and governance is only made up of people at the end of the day. There are systems, there are rules, there's, of course, the Constitution, et cetera. But it's the people that make the difference, the people that make the decisions, the people that negotiate the language, the bills, the text. I'm sure Ashley remembers many times sitting in a small room, talking to other staff and members of Congress and whatnot, and negotiating text to a bill where essentially it's a conversation. And so for people like Lindsey Graham who were able to engage and converse, they could get so much done because of their personality. And I think that's what you're hearing across the board. That personality, those personal qualities are what really endears someone, not just as a leader, but as someone who is leading. And I think that's what we need in all of our elected officials. Certainly, he brought that to the table.
Ashley, I noticed earlier watching some of the funeral service before we came on air here that the former Vice President Mike Pence is there, and he's been doing interviews with some of the US media, really speaking about the personal loss to him. Obviously, they toiled together on Capitol Hill for many decades, but it is one of those rifts that has not been mended in US political life, which is between President Trump and his former Vice President Mike Pence.
Absolutely. Another one of those rifts was George Bush and Dick Cheney. I mean, you know, this kind of happens post presidency sometimes, but there's a lot of people in that room. There's also Democrat senators, Democrat members of the House that are in this room. But also, I was just thinking, actually, when John Thune was speaking, I'm like, I'm sure he wants to go as far away as he can from the president right now with the pressure he's getting on some of these. So he's probably hiding underneath a pew.
Well, I mean, particularly on the sanctions bill that Lindsey Graham put so much pressure on trying to get that tabled. There is going to be a sort of procedural vote tonight. Really important for President Zelensky. He's actually going from this service to Capitol Hill. He's invited all 100 senators to meet him. Unclear how many of them will actually turn up to that meeting. But they've named that piece of legislation now in Lindsey Graham's name. Do you think, Ashley, will that be one that will get a very great level of support for now at this point on this day?
I do. There's been a little hiccups along the way in regards to some of the Trump's power extension, not his, but the presidency's, and some tariff issues. But I think that from what I understand, the Blumenthal, Senator Graham's sister, or both senators are going to put forward this bill this evening. The procedural vote will move forward with lots of majority votes, and there will be probably a final vote on Thursday, and it will celebrate him for, they wanted to get it done this week. So I don't think there's going to be anything that stands in the way.
And Joel, can I just ask you, been looking at these pictures of this this funeral for Lindsey Graham, and it strikes me, this is part of the American political system where you think of American politicians, you usually think of presidents and vice presidents, but sometimes you think of the great figures of Congress, don't you? And Lindsey Graham, really one of those.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, when I think about great senators and members of Congress, there's, of course, Sam Rayburn, whose name is on the building. There's Robert Byrd. There was Dianne Feinstein. There were many members who spent many decades shaping the country that we now live in, and negotiating, representing their constituents, building a better society for all of us. And we are not a unilateral country. We're not a monarchy. We don't have one leader and everybody else follows suit. We're a dynamic, feisty, competitive democracy. We have two chambers that are roiling. Within each chamber, there's continual change and turnover of people, elections all the time. And I think you have to tip your hat to members of Congress who stay throughout those times and make a career of it and shape those institutions for the better and shape the policy of the country. The ones who are there the longest, have that imprint, Dingell, for example, 50 plus years in the House, they are real legacy creators. And they in many ways outlast presidents who can only be here for 8 years. And I think members of Congress are royalty in Washington.
Joel, you mentioned there's no single leader and everyone falls in behind and does what they say. I suspect there are some people who at times wish there was a single leader and everyone falls in behind it.
No, we don't want a dictatorship. No, thank you.
No. Well, I'm going to be the dictator here and say we're all out of time, so we have to stop talking now. A pleasure as always to have you on the show, Ashley Davis and Joel Rubin. We will speak to you again soon. That's it for The Context USA for today here on BBC News.